What to watch for in week 2 of the NFL season from a fantasy football standpoint. We are going to break it down right here on the ADP Average Dudes podcast. I am your Average Dude host, Matt Mormon, and this is going to be a fun little thing where we're just going to go through each and every game this upcoming weekend, and I'm going to tell you just a storyline, maybe two, from each game that as you're watching, just kind of throw this in the back of your head. What's something to keep an eye on? There's so many games that happen on an NFL weekend, and there's some that you look at and you're say, gosh, what am I going to look for in this game? It's your local broadcast, and it's, the Packers and Falcons. Whoop-de-doo, right? So we're going to go through every game and tell you something to keep an eye on as you head into this upcoming weekend. So first things first, here the Thursday night game, and I feel like we're kind of lucky here. I feel like a lot of times the Thursday night games kind of suck on paper, and we've got a fun one coming up here, the Vikings and the Eagles. So to me, the big thing to watch for here is the Philadelphia Eagles running back situation. Is Kenneth Gainwell going to come through? He is, in my opinion, the number one pickup this week. Kind of him and Joshua Kelly, to me, were kind of right there neck and neck a little bit. But I think Gainwell's the guy to pick up this week. Will he come through? Will he be waiver wire fodder, or will he be the guy that we want him to be? What's his usage going to be like? He got 14 carries this week. DeAndre Swift got one. Boston Scott got one. Rashad Penny didn't even play. So will one of those guys reemerge? Will Penny be active this week? What would his role then be? Or is it just going to be the Kenneth Gainwell show against a defense that did play pretty well against Rachaad White? In my opinion, that says more about Rachaad White and the Tampa Bay offense than it does about Kenneth Gainwell. I'm sorry, that it does about the Minnesota Vikings defense. Up next is my favorite team in the NFL, the Baltimore Ravens, taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. And for me, this is kind of three storylines all wrapped up into one. The Baltimore Ravens injuries and the fallout from there, right? We're talking all week about the J.K. Dobbins injury. Who's going to step up? Is it going to be Gus Edwards? Is it going to be Justice Hill? Is it going to be Melvin Gordon? Do they go bring in a guy? It sounds like they're not going to bring in a guy, but could a lackluster performance this week change their mind on that? I've become more and more warmed up on Gus Edwards over the course of the day here. That's who I would kind of put my money on at this point, but it's not much money. If you want to spin that Ravens roulette wheel, I think you do it at your own risk. But also, the Ravens offensive line suffered two injuries with Tyler Linderbaum and Ronnie Stanley, the two best offensive linemen on the team, both getting hurt. So that is also a major loss. Those guys are both week to week at this point. And so you would not expect either of them to line up this week. What does that mean for those running backs? What does that mean for Lamar? That's definitely something to keep in mind here. For Lamar, does it mean he runs more now? If, plays are breaking down and the pass rush is getting to him, does he just take off? So that's something to keep an eye on. And then one more set of injuries to talk about with the Ravens. Marcus Williams and Marlon Humphrey both being out. I think this means it's an opportunity for the Bengals to just feast on this, a chance to feast on this Baltimore Ravens secondary. So those are all kind of things to keep an eye on, just the Ravens injuries as a whole. And Mark Andrews also, of course, there's Mark Andrews. So does that mean more targets also for Zay Flowers still? Does Andrews come back? I haven't seen anything yet this early on the week. It's only Tuesday right now. We'll know more about that as the week rolls on. Packers and Falcons. Can Green Bay force Atlanta to throw the ball more than 20 times? Last week, Desmond Ridder, only 18 pass attempts. If he has to throw the ball a little bit more, does that mean we get something out of Drake London? Does that mean we get something more out of Kyle Pitts? That would be lovely to see. You'd love to see it because a lot of people right now are really panicking, especially on Drake London at the moment. So if the Packers can have their offense dominate a little bit here, if Jordan Love can throw for quite a bit, just like he did last week with 3 touchdowns, does that then force Atlanta's hand into throwing the ball more? Or would Atlanta take the route, kind of like what the Houston Texans did last year, even if it's not even a neutral game script or a negative game script, do they still just continue to run the ball? I hope we can get some answers this week. And you know what, though? It may not matter at all because Jair Alexander will be on Drake London, so he may just be irrelevant anyway. But hopefully we can at least get some more pass attempts out of Desmond Ridder and this offense. The Vegas Raiders versus the Buffalo Bills. Can the Bills get this offense back on track? They're facing a bad defense in the Raiders this week, but the Bills looked terrible Monday night. Josh Allen just looked awful, and he had those 3 interceptions. He didn't have the deep ball at all. Is this an opportunity to get that back on track? If the downfield passing comes back, is this a Gabe Davis opportunity? Stephon Diggs, he looked fine. He looked great. James Cook had some great opportunities. He didn't turn it into a ton, but he did have some good usage. I like that. And so to me, this one's all about the Buffalo Bills offense. I want to see what they can turn into this week against a bad defense. Speaking of teams that did not look good in week 1, the Seattle Seahawks. I think the red flag has to be up right now on Geno Smith. Look, this is a guy who we have seen nothing out of for 10 years. Had an amazing first half of last season. He did struggle a little bit down the stretch, though. And then he had a pretty bad game against the Rams in week 1. And that kind of sank the weapons as well. Also Tyler Lockett suffered that concussion. I think it sounds like he'll be back for this one. We'll keep an eye on that for you. So if Geno Smith can get back on track, that should rise the tide for everybody. DK Metcalf kind of bailed you out with a touchdown last week. Didn't get a whole lot of yards, though. Didn't get a whole lot of catches. So if Geno can be a little bit better for this offense, that could definitely turn things around for all of those weapons. Hopefully even the running backs too. I was very disappointed in Zach Charbonnet. He barely even got used. Kenneth Walker was kind of decent for you, though. So at least there was that. But is Geno Smith any good? I think that this is a big, big test here against a Lions defense that did look good against the Chiefs. And by the way, we mentioned the injuries with the Ravens. Both offensive tackles for the Seattle Seahawks got hurt. That's definitely something to keep an eye on here. Is Aiden Hutchinson just going to feast on those guys and not let Geno get anything done in the air because he's getting tackled all game long? Chargers and Titans. Is the Chargers' run-heavy offense going to just be the offensive game plan? And if so, what does that mean for these pass catchers, and what does that mean for Justin Herbert? Remember, we were talking about Justin Herbert with a Kellen Moore offense having amazing opportunity. Well, through 1 week of the Kellen Moore offense, they ran the ball like Mike McCarthy really wanted them to, Eckler and Kelly kind of looked a little bit like Pollard and Zeke out there. And I don't think that's what all of us were necessarily anticipating or wanting out of this offense. So, look, I'm not expecting 40 rush attempts again out of the Chargers. But if the Chargers remain to be towards the top half of the league in rush attempts, that is definitely kind of a red flag for what my hopes were for Justin Herbert. I mean, me and Tanner both, we had him as like a 5,000-yard passing potential this season. And if they're going to run this much, that ain't going to happen. Moving on to the Bears and the Buccaneers. Can Baker Mayfield sustain both of these wide receivers again in a plus matchup? I know this is something Tanner talked about last week on the Start Sit Show, how that Vikings game was probably going to be one of the few games where he'd recommend both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Well, this Bears matchup, you're probably going to fire both those guys right back up. Can Baker come through a second time and get both of those guys fantasy-worthy numbers? And on the flip side of that field, can Justin Fields get DJ Moore more involved? As the DJ Moore guy, I'm not that worried yet. I want to give it a couple weeks. Last week was a rough one. Last week you're also facing Jair Alexander, who I think is one of the few corners that I really account for, right? There aren't many that I look at going into a week and say that's extra concerning and I'm going to actively make adjustments for. Alexander's one of those guys, though. So if DJ Moore can get at least open and get some more targets this week, I'll definitely be re-encouraged. The Chiefs and the Jaguars, this should be a fun one. And if Travis Kelce's out again, though, is Mahomes the only starter that you can play for the Kansas City Chiefs? I think Pacheco can be a low-end RB2 for you. I'm sitting all those wide receivers, though. And it's just so strange to think about with such a high-powered offense that you're only starting the quarterback and one of the running backs. But, I mean, McKinnon, I think at this point he's pretty droppable until he, thaws out and shows you something. I think you are justified to drop every Chiefs wide receiver. I don't think any of them are required to remain on your roster. I understand holding Sky Moore. I understand holding even Kadarius Toney. I've been touting ever since last week, Thursday, that I think Rashee Rice is a nice stash candidate, but sometimes you don't have room to stash guys. You can only stash so many. We don't have unlimited bench spots. So I understand not even owning a single Chiefs wide receiver, which is crazy to think with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback that there may just not be a useful weapon. And what does it do for Mahomes' ranking also? Tanner's going to have that start sit in his rankings show later on this week. I'll be curious to know, in a very good matchup with that Jacksonville Jaguars defense, where does he have Mahomes ranked? The Colts versus the Texans. The Texans defense, guys, was surprisingly very good against quarterbacks last season. And I think that was mainly pegged to the fact they just couldn't stop the run. So teams didn't even bother with really throwing. They just ran all over them and they milked the clock out. And they just beat them, right? They were pretty good against Lamar last week too, though. Lamar, I don't have it in front of me. I think he only scored like 7 or so fantasy points, depending on what your scoring was. So this week with Anthony Richardson, look, I like what I saw at Richardson last week. Is he a start this week, though? Can you play him against these Houston Texans? Are the Texans going to be a problem for quarterbacks moving forward? I think all those things are things to watch out for. I'm a big DeMeco Ryans fan. I think he's an awesome head coach. And I think that his schematics on that defense, I mean, maybe I'm just a sucker for the Kyle Shanahan tree, and that just leaks over to the defense too, where Shanahan really doesn't have much involvement. But I really like what I saw of the Texans defense against the Ravens. They only allowed 22 points. And I think that was pretty good showing. I really do. Against a good offense. And one that's stylistically similar too, by the way. You know, from the Texans standpoint, you had all offseason getting ready for week 1 against the Ravens. Now you're facing Anthony Richardson, a very similar quarterback. Are there things you could take away from that week 1 game plan and extrapolate into week 2? That's something to keep an eye on. 49ers versus the Rams. The Rams looking surprisingly good last week. Matthew Stafford with 334 passing yards. And obviously Puka Nacua, the big waiver wire pickup. Tutu Atwell also had a very nice game. And Kyren Williams, another one of these waiver wire darlings right now. Cam Akers, is he on his way out? What do the Rams look like? Here's the problem, though. It's a tough matchup. And the 49ers are the tough matchup in the NFL, in my opinion. They are the one that you consider benching every single player against, no matter who it is. And I think I would like to avoid playing every Ram. I think there's at least one league where I'm going to be kind of forced into playing Tyler Higbee because, as we all know from my tight end strategy, that is the strategy, is you just draft Tyler Higbee and you just play Tyler Higbee and you forget about it. I would like to get away from him potentially this week if I can. But what are the Rams going to look like against this matchup with the 49ers? If that Rams offensive line can actually hold up and be decent in this one, that's going to give me a lot of confidence in these Rams moving forward. The New York Football Giants take on the Arizona Cardinals. And to me, the thing to keep an eye on here is, what was the game plan for this Giants offense going into this season? We didn't get a chance to see it. Things went haywire. Everything went to hell quickly and early for the Giants last week. They were forced out of what they wanted to do. And early on in that game is when Darren Waller got all of his targets last week. Is Darren Waller the focus of this offense? I think he's got an opportunity to have a great game against Arizona, but I'm curious to see what is the game plan? What do the Giants want to do? And also, do one of those wide receivers emerge this week? If someone can have a big game against Arizona, I'm not saying I would move them into wide receiver 2 discussions at all, but maybe that can give you an indication as to who the guy is who would have a chance of becoming a flex moving forward, who their favorite wide receiver is. Because as I sit here today, I don't have a Scooby-Doo as to which Giants wide receiver they want to have be the guy. The Jets versus the Cowboys. My thing for this game is, will any of these wide receivers be able to overcome these corners? You know, Stephon Diggs managed to get himself a nice game against the Jets on Monday night. It was all kind of underneath stuff. But, man, there's Sauce Gardner. There's Hall, I believe is his name, on the other side of things for the Jets. On the Cowboys side, you got Trayvon Diggs. We know what that Cowboys defense just did against the New York Giants. I'm nervous about all these pass catchers. You kind of have to play CeeDee Lamb for sure. I think you have to play Garrett Wilson also. But I'm curious to see, are any of these pass catchers going to be able to break free? Is this kind of a running game? Is this kind of a low-scoring game between these two teams? And will any of these pass catchers be able to do anything at all against these defensive backs? The Washington Red Football Commanders versus the Denver Broncos. I don't have much for this one. Not going to lie. This is a game that really is hard to find something to look for. I think to me, the two things I came up with are number one, on the Washington side of things, is there a target split at all between T-Mac and Dotson now that McLaurin is maybe a second week back in the groove of things, right? He had that toe injury in the preseason against the Ravens. He did play last week, didn't look great in doing so. Second week of playing, though, can he reestablish himself as the one, or does Dotson start to pass him the way a lot of people kind of think he could this year? Myself sort of included in that group. I kind of do think that there's a path there for Jahan Dotson to be the wide receiver one in Washington. Does that start to come more to fruition this week? Or do we see Terry McLaurin say, no, it's my job at the wide receiver one? Denver side of things, can Russ just give us something to believe in? Show us a pass catcher getting a good target volume. Show us something. I don't think this Washington defense is all that good. They benefited a lot from playing Arizona last week. And I don't mind playing Washington this week as well. If you streamed them last week, I don't mind streaming them against Denver one bit. Russ doesn't scare me. I would really like Russ to scare me. And so that's my biggest storyline there on the Denver side of things. One more bonusy one here for you, because I just thought about the top of my head here, is Javonte Williams' workload. You know, Javonte was the primary back last week. And Samaje Perine still had his work, though, but kind of looked like a backup modern NFL role, right? Like, gosh, there's only, 4-5 running backs in the entire league at this point that are true bell cows, true every down running backs. The rest of them are loosely committees. And so does Javonte have the ability to force Perine into that role again this week in his second game back from the ACL? And the third stringer, I'm blanking on his name at the moment. There were lots of rumors about him getting a lot of work, and he did not get much at all. So that's kind of what I'm looking for in Washington versus Denver. All right, Sunday night game. The Miami Dolphins versus the New England Patriots. Bill Belichick, notorious for years. If you've been playing fantasy for a while, you know Belichick likes to take away whatever it is that you do best and make you do something else. Well, for the Miami Dolphins, does that mean that he tries to take away Tyreek Hill? If so, does Jalen Waddle capitalize on that? Does Durham Smythe become an option? Does River Cockcroft or something like that? Oh gosh, I'm blanking on what his name was. I should have. That's a name I definitely should have had in front of me because I knew I was going to forget it. Because I'm not going to lie to you guys, there's not many players in the NFL who catch passes that I look at and say, I don't really know who that player was. And this was one of them this week. River Cracraft, Cracraft. He had 5 targets last week. He was actually the wide receiver 23. He caught that touchdown, one of the many that Tua threw last week. So is that a guy who could be a little bit of a thing this week as well? So there's a couple guys there. Durham Smythe could be a sneaky play at tight end this week. But New England is pretty good at taking away tight ends as well. But I wonder if they just focus all that attention on Tyreek Hill and a little bit of that on Jalen Waddle as well. Final game, Monday night game, the Cleveland Browns against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think there's a couple things to watch here for. Number one being, does Pittsburgh offense just suck? And it's maybe unfair to have that be weighed on this game because Cleveland just made Cincinnati's offense suck. And that's a great offense out there in Cincinnati. We all know that. So if Pittsburgh shut down by Cleveland here, after how inept they look against San Francisco, does that give you the complete heebie-jeebies on a Pickens and a Harris, right? Freiermuth is banged up. I think he's going to play, it sounds like, I believe. Deontay Johnson will not, though. So opportunity there for George Pickens, but it's against a pretty darn good defense that really just shut down the Bengals offense. You know, T. Higgins went 0 catches and 8 yards. And George Pickens is kind of a T. Higgins stylistic receiver. And so is Pittsburgh offense just going to be totally inept once again? How will you feel about that moving forward? On the Cleveland side, Elijah Moore. You know, I was kind of out on Elijah Moore all summer. I kind of had seen enough over the last year, and I was kind of done with him. I was kind of out on him. He played very well week 1, though. I want to see what his role is going to be. And is he going to potentially really emerge as that wide receiver 2 option that so many want him to become? So, guys, that's going to wrap it up for me here. that is the things I am watching for this week in week 2 of the NFL season. Be sure to keep up with the podcast, like and subscribe on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, all those good platforms that you all know and love. Be sure to follow us on the X at ADP Dudes, and we will see y'all later on this week. Tanner's going to have those rankings, those starts and sits for you later on this week to help you set your lineups, and we will see you all next time.